Now imagine this. You go to your favourite restaurant and you discover it's got more than 60 security cameras. Wow. You might think they're really security conscious. But what if every table in the restaurant has been captured by not one, but 2 cameras, and they're exclusively focused on the patrons? Well, it'd probably creep you out a little bit. What if this is not just any restaurant? What if it's an eatery linked to the Chinese Communist government, and the cameras are actually there to spy on you? Well, if you're like me, you'd be appalled. But that's what's happened in Canada, and it could well be happening here too. In the words of one observer, China's surveillance system of social credit has now expanded globally. Now, China's social credit system is a method of documenting individual and corporate behaviour. And basically it's been taking place in China, and the Chinese government officials insist it's designed to build trust. Of course, you can believe that. But in reality, it is a system of perpetual spying by the communist tyrants, and it's designed to punish non-compliant behaviour. Now, it appears it's being used to spy on patrons of upmarket restaurants in foreign countries. Now, these are the sorts of restaurants that are frequented by diplomats or politicians, business professionals, where all manner of deals, strategies, and indeed secrets could be discussed. Little wonder that information would have appeal to the communists. Now, the restaurant mentioned above is the Haidilao Hot Pot in Vancouver, and there are 935 Haidilao Hot Pot locations right around the world, including here in Australia. Haidilao Hot Pots boast 36 million VIP members and employ more than 60,000 staff. Now, I've got to say, I do not know if all of them are used to spy on their patrons, but the manager of one of the Vancouver operations, is a guy named Ryan Pan, is quoted as saying the cameras were installed to punish staff and to people track. He acknowledged the video footage was sent back to China, but he would only say the reason for this was secret. There's nothing to worry about here, I'm pretty sure about that, just the video footage going back for secret purposes. It's your private dinner conversation, your biometric details, being sent back to the biggest surveillance state in history. The Chinese social credit system requires all Chinese citizens to be enrolled on a national database where they're rated on a social score. If you do the right thing by the CCP, then you'll get priority benefits. But if you hang out with a wrong type of person, for example, you might be banned from doing something like getting on public transport. So make no mistake, the social credit system is absolute tyranny. And it works the same with Chinese businesses in China. But now it's clear that the social credit score applies to Chinese businesses operating internationally too. We know, because we've seen it, that international brands are punished by China if they don't actively support China's policies. And that's why you find organisations like, say, the NBA and other pathetic virtue signalling corporates protesting against the plight of multimillionaire black basketballers in America, while also at the same time praising the Chinese Communist Party. That's the team, the CCP team, that is committing genocide against the Uyghurs and harvesting organs for sale. But why would you let that interfere with a basketball business, hey, NBA? Anyway, in February of this year, the director of Canada's Security Intelligence Service made a rare address. Here's what he said.
To be clear, the threat does not come from the Chinese people, but rather from the government of China that is pursuing a strategy for geopolitical advantage on all fronts: economic, technological, political, and military, and using all elements of state power to carry out activities that are a direct threat to our national security and sovereignty. We all must strengthen our defenses.
Now, we've had similar warnings from our own intelligence agencies, but who really knows how far the apparatus of the communist surveillance state has extended beyond its own borders? Indeed, it could be coming to a hot pot near you. Scott McGregor, thank you for joining me. Tell me, how were you alerted to these cameras in the Haidilao Hot Pot restaurant in Vancouver?
Well, it's an interesting story. In the process of writing a book, and a lot of the research leads us to different sources, and we have information that comes to us through those sources. And during that, part of the work, we managed to find some information that led us to further investigate. And we happened to notice that, the information we received was pretty accurate. And then after the interview with the manager, that kind of confirmed exactly what was being said. So we decided it would be something that we needed to share.
Well, with your interview with the manager, he's quoted as saying in the article that you wrote that the imagery and the footage is shipped directly to China, that it is used for secret purposes, and you also make the point that the installation of these cameras is not in accordance with the normal code that is required in Vancouver. It's using a different technology. Is that correct?
Well, what's interesting is the type of cameras that are used, or we more often see in a casino. They're large CCTV cameras, and it's the sheer number. So they're the bubble style. They really stand out. Yeah, there's an image here that shows you, and that many is definitely something that's odd. It doesn't fit with anything that we've seen in in a normal restaurant or many other public places. So this is something you might see, in a casino, trying to look for people stealing money and that kind of thing. The purpose of them, was really questionable just from the site. And then after discussing it with the manager, we determined that there's a lot more going on.
Well, there is something going on, clearly, and this is just one restaurant, but it's one of 935 Haidilao Hot Pot restaurants around the world, including, I think, a couple in Vancouver. We've got at least one here in Australia. Is this the only evidence you've got of the surveillance system operating in these restaurants?
So this is the first instance of this type of camera. The consulate has some cameras that reach out onto the streets and are often seen collecting information on protesters and some of the Hong Kong dissidents, if you will. And so, we've been aware of some of this type of surveillance for a time now. But this really, struck us as invasive. It's looking at people that are there, making minimum wage and just trying to really make a living. And the fact that it's sent back to China and is, live streamed and reviewed by the security. The manager talked about the information being secret, and he wasn't allowed to talk about what was done with that information. That raises some questions because we know that there is this type of surveillance going on. We know that there's thousands of agents here that are working with Skynet and Foxhunt, trying to bring back what is determined to be China's most wanted. And so there's a lot going on in Vancouver. We know there's a lot going on in Australia. There's a lot of connectivity when it comes to some of the connections between the United Front Work Department, which is the propaganda arm of the People's Liberation Army. They conduct influence operations here. And so we know that this surveillance could be used for nefarious, or what we would consider nefarious reasons. And it poses a lot of questions, and we think there's a lot more investigation that's required.
Well, of course, there's the Chinese social credit system, and that is where all Chinese citizens are assessed on their behaviour about whether they receive certain privileges or are prohibited from getting on public transport or the like. There's also the corporate credit system, which says if you're a good Chinese company, you need to comply with Chinese law. And surely there must be some concerns from your security perspective or with your security expertise that this is an outreach of that corporate social credit system, and it may be a pilot project or may have just indeed spread right around the world with commercial Chinese firms.
Yes, and that's the question, isn't it? We know that the Canadian government is aware of this social credit system, and they're trying to make Canadian companies aware of how they need to conduct themselves. But the fact that this is being done in Canada, given our labor laws and privacy acts and concern for citizens' well-being, we know that there's exploitation happening of Chinese citizens, Chinese Canadian citizens here in Vancouver and across Canada. So it raises a lot of concern about what type of project this might be, whether it's using restaurants. We see activity in universities, and we know that there's this collection of information that's being sent back to China to be used by their security services. And so, there's a lot of concern around it, and I think that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing people paying attention following this article.
Yeah, and it's not just the Chinese diaspora or the expats, of course. Any customer or client of this particular restaurant could have sensitive information about themselves, whether it be a business deal or if they were engaged in government policy or even just a private conversation. You don't know what is being recorded and what is being sent back. And I'm making the presumption that no one is advised of this when they enter into this restaurant, that everything they do is going to be tracked and monitored and sent back to the Communist Party in China.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the biometrics capabilities that are available now, depending on who's visiting that restaurant, there's some information that can be sent back that may relate to trade negotiations. It may relate to additional tracking methods by their security services. We're not fully aware of exactly what the nature of their collection is, how extensive it is, but given the size and scope of the number of cameras, we're assuming that there's a lot of data being transferred back to China from this one location.
Well, it certainly opened up a number of questions, and we're going to investigate those at our end here, and we'll hopefully stay in touch. But Scott McGregor, you served with distinction in Afghanistan for the Canadian military. You've got some mates who were commemorating this weekend with Anzac Day. It's one of the most profound days on the Australian calendar. You want to send a couple of g'days out, do you?
I did. I served overseas with Darren Jeffs and Matthew Dunn. We were in the Middle East together in 2010 and spent almost a year overseas. And I'd love to have them hear my shout out so they can celebrate Anzac Day and have a pint for me.